Great, because my company sponsors it. Hey everybody, I'm Chris, founder of Open Agents. So yeah, I've got some material I'm going to go through on the topic of the convergence of AI and Bitcoin, but I would like this to be somewhat interactive. I'm going to blast through some material. We have a mic if anyone wants to interject. I might make some spicy takes. Feel free to react there. You can shout stuff out from your chair, but no one will hear you on the internet. So if you want to be heard by the internet, we got that mic there. And I might even see if I can retweet something. If PlebLab tweets it, I'll retweet it. Maybe we can get some internet friends on it too. So I'll just watch out for that. So I'm gonna just kind of cycle through some tabs here. I'll start by just kind of giving like an overall, high level picture of my thesis here. Just some mental models that help me and may hopefully help you make sense of what to look for at this convergence of Bitcoin and AI. So Bitcoin as money, I'm just going to kind of assume that people already understand this, but this is happening. I'm pretty excited as someone I've been in Bitcoin since like 2011. Don't ask me when I bought and when I sold. Okay, I bought at 30, sold at 200, kicking myself ever since. But it's been awesome to see with all this ETF thing, regardless of how you what level of importance you put on the ETF. I think that Bitcoin now, particularly just as it's turned 15, is entering this new phase where I view it now as essentially inevitable. I agree with Michael Saylor that Bitcoin is either going to go to 1 million or zero. And now that you've got some of the largest, money managers in the world now having financial incentive to have Bitcoin be adopted, I think it's just a matter of time now for Bitcoin to become the global reserve currency of the world. And then the question is, how do we have this be more than just money? What kind of cool stuff can we do anchored to or adjacent to Bitcoin? So you have these Bitcoin adjacent app layers, Nostr, Fediment. I put Web5 on here. I'm most familiar with Nostr. That's kind of what I began focusing on with my startup a year ago and kind of pivoted a bit since then. I'm a contributor to that protocol. So Nostr it's known as sort of a decentralized social media protocol. That's how it's kind of best known, but it can be used for all sorts of other types of applications. We'll get into that a little bit later. And then, you got Fediment doing cool things with new custody models and getting kind of communities building up using their own kind of unique custody solutions. And Web5 has kind of been, in slow development. They're about to put out a relatively large release, at least according to the people behind there. But this other kind of idea of a lightweight sort of key and metadata architecture that is not on or anchored directly to Bitcoin, but it's kind of like a nice, thing that works well with it, sort of adjacent to it. I'm gonna try to kind of break some of the web development trends down as simply as I can. But they kind of cheekily named Web 5 and just kind of skipping over Web 4. And I want to kind of pause and say, no one's really defined Web 4 that I've seen. So I'm going to take a crack at it. Web 4 is kind of the web of no thank you, kind of saying no to a lot of the accumulated cruft of the past, and certainly saying no to a lot of the shitcoinery and Ponzi-nomics of the Web 3 movement. But there's two kind of technical trends, and we can maybe detail some of this later. I'm sensing that there is about to be or starting to be a kind of a rebellion against quote unquote big JavaScript. Part of what led JavaScript and all these really heavyweight frameworks, I think, is just the abundance of VC funding that's gone into dev tools, and everyone's trying to build their really complicated, hey, use my my framework for auth, or things that you could otherwise solve more simply. And there's been sort of this rebel movement against that. There's a number of forms of that, but the main one that people have been talking about increasingly in the last few months is HTMX, just a very lightweight kind of protocol, call it a hypermedia protocol. I recommend people check out htmx.org and look into the content available there for more of a primer. This will all make sense in a bit. And then you've got isolated moats. This is something that I've seen happen in particularly like the Web3 realm. So one thing in my past experience as an entrepreneur was trying to build a decentralized rideshare network, had some success, particularly here in Austin, and some failures trying to use Ethereum to scale that beyond Austin to the world. And one of the things that I noted about the Ethereum space back in 2017, 2018, when all these kind of hypey ICOs were raising money, I had pretty much the most prominent decentralized rideshare project in 2017-ish. And yet over that next year, I lost count at 20 different decentralized ride sharing projects that formed. They put on their website a white paper, they're issuing a token, they do a token sale, they stick their hands out for money, and essentially zero of those projects shipped anything, had any rides, and exactly zero of them reached out to us to collaborate or get something going together. When you contrast that with once I kind of discovered Nostr a couple years ago and was saw some, I think Ben Ark or someone had put up a proposal, a spec for a decentralized Uber anchored to Nostr. I started getting into the GitHub chain, and within a matter of less than a week, I think it was Ben Ark, a super testnet, we had these 3 different demos where we were showing a ride request showing up in 3 different Nostr clients. I had more collaboration in a single week in this sort of Bitcoin adjacent Nostr space than I did with any of the Ethereum thing. And what that points to, I think, is also when everyone has their own token and they're trying to shill their own tokens, shill their own bags, it's you have an incentive to ignore everything else that's going on out there. But because we sort of honor and acknowledge Bitcoin as money, and we're not issuing our own tokens, it just lends itself to a lot more interoperability. A related idea to that in the sort of web development world, I think, is that instead of different projects kind of all building their own functionality and having it being living exactly only within their own company, there's this kind of new idea of WebAssembly being this, it's kind of call it a compile target. But basically imagine that you've got 20 different programming languages out there that people are building maybe the same code in a bunch of different languages. And so if you are a developer trying to build an app with a particular set of functionality, you might be sort of limited to, if you want to kind of build on the open source work that's out there, the best work that's going on right now for, Fediment integration in a Bitcoin wallet is being done in Rust, let's say, by the Mutiny team. And if I want to really learn and get a really good example of that type of integration, I really need to be the state of the art is in Rust. Similar for the, LND is all written in Go. Bitcoin Core is in C++. And so it's a little bit limiting as a developer who has a specialty in, let's say my background is in Laravel and PHP and some JavaScript. I'm kind of limited in my ability to contribute to or understand these projects because they're written in completely different languages. There's this kind of new movement that's been kind of bubbling for a number of years around WebAssembly, which is this, I'm going to try to put it in simple terms, but is also somewhat accurate. It's a compile target, meaning that you can compile from any different language, not any language, but let's say there's 20 languages you can compile to WebAssembly, and then you can consume that WebAssembly binary from 10 to 20 languages. What this enables is functionality that can be reasoned about separate from the programming language itself. So one thing that we are integrating with, and I've been exploring this in the last few videos of mine, is this idea of a plugin system kind of built on top of this WebAssembly thing. So there's a project called xtism.org, and just a little bit of the why of this. I just want to read one little blurb here. Let's see. So why does this matter? A plugin system is a software that enables your users or customers to add some logic into certain points in your application. You decide where this logic runs, and your users decide what the plugin does. Many engineering teams face an ever-growing list of feature requests, often exceeding their bandwidth several times over. How can you ever keep up? making your product extensible by its end users is a great way to move some of those features outside the core and empower customers to make your software more useful for them. Practically speaking, you can't predict all the ways users will want to work with your software, and for that reason alone, a plugin system is an ideal feature to implement. So one of the themes that I'm trying to explore is how can we kind of work together and not be duplicating code. We'll get more into that a little bit later. The big trend, and what we'll spend the most time on, but I want to kind of lay out how the rest of these trends all kind of work together, is open source AI. So AI generally is, I'm not going to go too much into the importance, and you all seen the news and ChatGPT and all of these waves of disruption, and we're in a classic kind of hype bubble where everyone's freaking out about, oh, this is going to change everything, and even though I kind of do think it's going to change everything or change a lot of things, there's still a lot of kind of crap and garbage out there. But the one thing that I've been paying close attention to is, what is the power structure that's kind of backing this? In the same way that Bitcoin is sort of a rebellion against the centralized fiat powers. You're seeing some of those same dynamics play out in the realm of open source AI, and I've been kind of positioning my efforts specifically contra OpenAI, the company, the recently valued at $100 billion company. And I have kind of made the argument that centralized control of AI, there's a lot of fear about AI being a extinction level evolutionary threat. I don't think there's anything wrong with AI itself, but I do worry that there might be these kind of completely centralized control of AI that could lead to all sorts of bad behavior. OpenAI is in my mind a complete hypocrite because it was founded explicitly to be this open source, truly open, transparent counterweight to what Google had been doing in private. So it was named OpenAI by Elon Musk, who intended it to be open. And then, getting back also to the kind of all of the chicanery and bad stuff that happened from the Web3 scene. I mean, it was Sam Bankman-Fried, the main guy behind FTX, who, by the way, we're still dealing with the fallout of all of that chicanery because, the funds that were implicated in that whole FTX network, Grayscale had huge exposure to that. And so, the price action is we're still dealing with the wreckage of the Web3 king. But SBF, one of these effective altruists who funded a ton of money into this whole effective altruist movement, that over the last few years, there's been this sort of shift in the definition of what it means for AI safety. AI safety back when Elon was helping set up OpenAI was, hey, this is really important technology. It needs to be developed in the open. And what it's since evolved to become, it's been sort of hijacked by these people who are setting up these lobbying operations and trying to get governments to regulate AI, and what it's a standard case of regulatory capture. Whenever you have people kind of incentivized to cement a moat for themselves, they'll bulk up a massive lobbying army and try to prevent smaller players. So this is something that we've seen as this absolutely needs to be challenged. I want to kind of jump over to kind of the best, clearest explanation of sort of the intersection between Bitcoin, the Lightning Network, Nostr, and AI, and kind of go through read a few excerpts from this. This is sort of like a manifesto written by Hivemind VC, one of the most active investors in Lightning Network and Nostr, and now AI. Full disclosure, Hivemind is an investor in OpenAgents, and this was written maybe 6 to 9 months ago. And so what I want to do is kind of go through some of these excerpts about what Max, the author of this, finds exciting. And kind of update this of kind of what's happened over the last 6 to 9 months since this was written, kind of who's doing what. And then I encourage anyone who kind of can supplement that with other things either you're working on or projects that you know about, and we can kind of open this up into a little bit more of a discussion. So let's just kind of blast through a few of these things. So you got people talking about like, oh, we might become extinct because of paperclip optimization, where the runaway AI is going to, you're going to tell it to optimize for producing the most paper clips, and it decides that the best way to optimize for that is to like kill all humans before making like paperclip factories. Probably unlikely, but it seems to me, this is a quote, that the single best safeguard for any theoretical or unknown risks from AI is nature itself, i.e., letting evolution run its course to grow competing/cooperating intelligences that will keep other AIs in check. There's far more intelligence in nature than the marvelous but limited modeling capabilities of the mind. I am, however, much more concerned about the concrete risks of already powerful corporations and governments gaining monopolies over these new superpowers and using them to increase their control over human thought and action. Humanity is at a turning point where we must either embrace a small handful of totalitarian superintelligences or move AI to the edge, allowing a wide diversity of machine intelligences to flourish in cooperation with an equally diverse set of human intelligences, forming a truly decentralized hive mind. So here's the current generation of open source is not by itself enough. We need to solve at least 3 problems to build a truly capable swarm intelligence. Number 1, how do we train and serve federated open models? Number 2, how do we improve the data quality of open models? Number 3, how do we equip AI agents to interact economically? That last third one's what I'm now focusing on. So, and Max is kind of positing that there is sort of necessary infrastructure to solve these problems and link up billions of humans and trillions of machine intelligences together in a networked hive mind. They are Bitcoin as the neutral, decentralized protocol for money and value, the Lightning Network as the neutral, decentralized protocol for payments, Nostr as the neutral, decentralized protocol for data and communications. I'm going to take a sip of water. Does anyone have any questions, comments, insults, reflections, requests for clarification thus far? Come up to the mic and just kind of comment or...
So some of the feedback I've been hearing from VCs in the space is that Nostr is too early to invest in. Also, the AI stuff is still too early. And then also one of the other things I've heard is that it's already hard enough to build and do Bitcoin from a startup level and to get to profitability. What would be your answer to that? What would be your answer to that? If we should we just be focused just on Bitcoin or some of these other adjacent technologies?
I'd say it depends what you're focused on. There's plenty of people that are more accustomed to making sort of financial analyses and relating to Bitcoin as money, and those people probably should not be trying to build out the app layer. It takes a particular type of person, a particular type of investor to be able to make the analyses around what is that sort of foundational technical substrate of future waves of applications. You're either like, able to make those analyses and comfortable with that, or you're not. Where I come in as someone who has, I've been a contributor to the Nostr protocol. I wrote NIP 28, the public chat spec, 2-3 years ago. I helped on NIP 32, the sort of like reputation NIP. I'm not 100% sold that the future substrate of all AI agents is necessarily going to be Nostr. I am bullish and I believe that the future substrate of AI agents in the decentralized economy is going to rely on a lightweight key and metadata, public key cryptography, and metadata attached to public keys architecture generally. Right now, Nostr is the most prominent example of a app ecosystem that fits that architecture exactly, and it's iterating amazingly. It's out there in the wild. You can kind of contrast that approach with Web 5, which is sort of a more more thorough, more comprehensive approach, sponsored by the company Block and their TBD division, which is kind of building out sort of futuristic Bitcoin adjacent architecture. And they're explicitly kind of lining things up with the web standards specification process from the W3C. And I think that there's like real value in that approach. But that's been in development for the last couple of years. Meanwhile, Nostr has become this kind of force of nature, people adopting it and being much easier to build in. I do predict there will be some sort of convergence. And the other one I didn't mention, the slash tags protocol from the Synonym team is also very similar, lightweight kind of key and metadata architecture. I do predict that there will be some sort of convergence between the general key and metadata architectures. I could see Nostr like maybe borrowing some concepts from Web 5. There's already been some collaborations, I think, between Melvin and one of the Web 5 guys on kind of having this did Nostr protocol. Like the beautiful thing about Nostr is that it can kind of like upgrade and kind of take ideas from better protocol or from protocols as it makes sense that people can opt into. It just got like a different architecture to it. So regardless of whether you like think Nostr, like you don't have to be a Nostr maxi to recognize like the value that it's providing. And one of the big things to me as someone who 5 years ago, I was like trying to build applications on Ethereum and thinking that, I want to build decentralized applications that are used by consumers. Bitcoin can't support this, so I have to use Ethereum. Like no, like there are layers where you can like have that decentralized data piece missing from Bitcoin, but supplement it with a protocol like where it's sort of offloaded onto its own network, but like works really well with it. So I hope that answered the question. Like, this kind of stuff needs to be built. There's some investors and people that will just want to support kind of applications when things are ready for applications to be built. But yeah, some of this infrastructure just has to be built first. So I'm going to kind of blast through these three kind of categories and just give my thoughts on them and kind of who I know is working on them. So number one being federated model training and serving. There are three major steps in creating and deploying federated models: foundation training, fine tuning, and serving. The foundation model is like the base model. So this is when you hear the companies that are like buying tens of thousands of GPUs and training foundation models. You've got companies like Anthropic, which in my mind has been one of the worst offenders on the whole AI safety government regulation thing I was talking about earlier. These are people that split off from OpenAI because they didn't think that they were aggressive enough on the safety things. And these are the main people that you see writing op-eds calling for government regulation and flying to DC and trying to schmooze people into, regulating the smaller players. But you've got companies like that have raised a lot of funding specifically to train their own foundation model. I don't see this right here as even really worth talking about too much, in part because we have this massive champion of open source models called Meta. Like, surprise, what a redemption story for them. But the Llama and Llama 2 and forthcoming, it just came out a couple days ago, they're going to be coming out soon with Llama 3, this like really powerful model. Llama 2 was on par with GPT 3.5, at least kind of once people were to get their hands on it and kind of use it to fine-tune little customized versions of it. The speculation is that Llama 3 is going to be somewhat on par with GPT-4, completely open source, open weights. People can, I should qualify that. Open source usually means you can reproduce it. We can't reproduce the Llama models, or really any of even the open models that have been out there, because people generally have not been releasing their data sets. And there's some speculation, or more or less certainty, that why they don't do that is because they train on a whole bunch of copyrighted data material, like training on the entire internet. There's all these copyright things, and you see the New York Times lawsuit against OpenAI. It's like a sensitive issue. So some of that stuff won't be open source, and which I think is an argument to have some of that be provided by this network. Let's keep going. So you got fine tuning. So basically, like, we don't really need to do too much of this, because whether it's Meta or other people, there are now like really strong financial incentives for even super large companies to release the weights of their model, because it like releases all of this innovation. It gets a bunch of developers kind of continuing to build in their ecosystem. And the open community has really kind of closed the gap with OpenAI over the last year. It remains to be seen how the upcoming GPT-5 release will impact that and how far behind the open systems are. But bullish on foundation models being somewhat solved. So fine-tuning. Once a foundation model is trained, the next step is fine-tuning that model with additional data for a specific use case. One of the most common types of fine-tuning is reinforcement learning from human feedback, whereby real people can rate the validity of a model's output. This sort of federated human feedback can also be provided more efficiently with instant lightning payments, as anyone around the world with a phone can be paid instantly for providing feedback. Companies like Stackwork are already doing this today, and I expect the trend to go quickly, perhaps with other machines increasingly replacing humans for the labeling. So here you've got kind of like two components. You've got the compute needed to run the fine tune, which is somewhat similar to the compute that trains the foundation models, except because you're starting with a foundation model, you don't need to you're not talking about millions or billions of dollars worth of compute. You're talking about maybe a few $100 or a few $1,000 or less or more to fine tune and kind of aim the model for a particular use case. You've got the compute required, and then you've got the data. Right now, the data is being kind of provided by Hugging Face. There's a lot of machine learning researchers that are publishing open data sets on Hugging Face. And that's kind of where the majority of the data piece of that is going. On the compute side, that's not hard to do with some powerful compute infrastructure that some people have, like the MacBook M3 or M2. You can run a fine-tuning job in maybe a few hours or overnight. One of the ideas that we had originally, as I was chafing against some of the restrictions when I was trying to add AI chat, uncensored AI chat to my Nostr chat client a year ago, or maybe 8 months ago, was that there were the places where you could kind of get reliable hosting for uncensored models, like the Hugging Face inference endpoints. You got all these red errors about not enough hardware capacity. So at least 6 to 8 months ago, and still a little bit of an issue, this idea of there being some supply constraints around GPUs was sort of the initial motivator for me to kind of pivot my startup to focus more on AI. And specifically, I was like, oh, wait a second, instead of having to worry about what some centralized service has by way of availability, because all they're doing is reselling you the limited supply from the cloud providers anyway, I was like, given that a bunch of this stuff increasingly can be run on consumer hardware, which is getting more and more powerful, where is the open marketplace of GPU compute that I can just pay lightning sats and just pay for the compute that I need and not have to worry about availability? Because even if I have to pay 3, 5, 10x above spot for something that I want done quickly, I'd be willing to do that rather than just be trying to beg these service providers to give me a GPU. So that was the initial thought behind GPUtopia. We built this, a basic version of this. We have a live network currently of about 200 workers, people running our software, kind of contributing their GPU power to this open network, which is accessible with an OpenAI compatible AI endpoint. We haven't really edited this in the last couple of months because we've been pivoting to focus on agents, but the network still works. We're using this network currently in our agents product to power the embeddings. So as an example of what this network can do, we're taking some of the software that people have already figured out. Here's how you run text inference, llama-based text inference, or embeddings, or image gen, or fine-tuning. Here's how you can run it with consumer hardware. We've added support for those into our worker software that now about 200 people are running, and we paired that with a OpenAI compatible endpoint with code here, where we give you a API key that you get from our website, and then when you send out a request, you hit the endpoint and say, I want an embedding. Our system will send that request to one of the connected workers, assuming they're available and they can process the type of job that you want. So we did this first for inference. We added embeddings, and so our network right now, the chatbot that we've been launching over the last month or so, uses this network for embedding. So when I uploaded or generated embeddings of like 900 pages of the Epstein court documents, and I was like, I don't really want to send this to a centralized service because they're all like touchy about this like sensitive subject material. But being able to send it to our network that doesn't have that level of censorship was like super cool. So just as an example, like we have this live network of we're providing inference, embeddings, basic image gen using one of the open source image generation, as well as fine tuning all in this open network. The fine tuning is an example of something because it's a heavier weight process. We had to have like a specialized version of our worker that only some of the most powerful consumer hardware workers have been able to run successfully, but we have been able to do fine tuning jobs specifically here. So this is just an example of how doing fine tuning or doing basically any of the kinds of things that people are expecting to get from OpenAI, doing that in an open fashion that's like uncensored and uses consumer hardware, it's largely solved, not just by us, but there's been so many people like working on this and trying to like just build open versions of all this. The one thing that hasn't really yet been built in a truly open, decentralized way, and potentially startup idea for other people here, is the data idea. So let's just kind of skip some of that other stuff. We'll come back to it. But so large language models are only as good as the data they ingest. Garbage in, garbage out. Since foundation models are trained primarily on the internet without distinguishing fact from fiction, it makes complete sense that they often output completely erroneous statements commonly called hallucinations. While reinforcement learning from humans and other machines can help with this problem, it doesn't solve the fundamental issue with a diet of junk information models are eating. Noster's open and flexible protocol for data and communications can solve this problem by providing the backbone for training open foundation models and fine-tuning private enterprise or personal models. So open foundation models, and then Noster's architecture is also perfect for fine-tuning open models with private data as well. This is because new relays can be easily launched and permissioned. You could imagine a world where a user chooses to public social media style notes to relays with maximum propagation, work notes to a relay only accessible to colleagues, family photos only to a relay only accessible to family members, etc. You could then take a public foundation model and fine-tune different AI assistants on each relay to create a team of AIs, each with different data access and capabilities. So kind of the idea here is just having more granular control over what type of data gets trained on. Nostr as a way of kind of making that easily accessible to people with different layers of permissioning. And this is somewhat related to this is the idea that Jan LeCun, one of the, I guess the chief scientist at Meta, who's sort of the main champion of the llama models and the open source work that Meta does, something that he's called for repeatedly is a sort of open Wikipedia style platform for crowdsourced data curation. Hugging Face is somewhat close. It has a level of kind of transparency around data sets that people upload, but to be able to have more granular, fine-grained control over what data sets go into these models, you could imagine that instead of just researchers who know all about this compiling their own data set, uploading it to Hugging Face, that other kind of like ML researchers are going to be using, like where is the platform that can enable anybody to themselves upload something that they're a specialist about and put it online in a way that maybe they could sell access to it for like a couple of sats if someone uses your expert knowledge base. Maybe you went through and you synthesized a whole bunch, you collected all of the, as an example, of those Epstein court documents. Like let's just say that you hunted down all of the relevant material, you sorted it, you tagged it, you uploaded that. You should be able to be paid for that kind of work. That's just an example of a platform that does not currently exist and probably should. According to Jan LeCun. Let me just get back up here to kind of an example. So there's been a few like Lightning hackers, Lightning and Nostr hackers that have been doing examples of this. So here's one from May from Laolu, the CTO of Lightning Labs, forking McKay Wrigley's chatbot UI, so like this open source chat UI, like a clone of ChatGPT, all open source, hooking it up to Brian Romilly's GPT-for-All, which is a software that lets you run open models on a local device with GetAlby integration to support Lightning Network micropayments for queries run against open source models. now AI creators can offset costs, and underbanked users around the world can use. It's all open source, runnable today. There's a LangChain AI agent that uses a wrapper API chain with L402 integration. This is like sort of the payment required protocol from Lightning Labs, still kind of in development or the final spec process. But there's companies now like Sulu Solutions, who we're working with on the L402 side. The basic idea is that you can take any API endpoint and require a Lightning Network payment, and that the theory is that this is going to be what these agents are going to be using to transact economically to different API endpoints. Bots can access real-world resources. We get paid in SaaS. And I just want to give one other example of a project that I worked together with one of our team members, Eric, and Cody, who's done a bunch of other hacking on this, who works now with Fetty. So we did the Anthropic AI hackathon a few months ago. So we built AudGit, a GitHub code review auditor using Pablo Noster Dev NIP90 data vending machine, enabling AI agents to compete to provide GitHub code audits using Claude's 100K token context and earn payments in Lightning. And there's still just like a lot of kind of, all these libraries are very early and kind of got to hack things together. So that's just an example of that. And then we'll just quickly go through three. So machine payments, banking the AIs. The real power of open source AI comes when you are able to combine a wide variety of openly trained and fine-tuned models with other data and services, chaining them together and equipping them with tools to navigate the internet and wider world. This was the general thesis behind Benchmark and Sequoia's recent investment in LangChain, one of the fastest growing open source projects ever that makes it easy to link LLMs with each other and external data. It sounds like it's a shitcoin project, but it's not. No blockchain there. Because interacting with other agents and virtual resources has real-world costs, e.g. compute, electricity, storage, bandwidth, these AI agents will soon need to interact economically, i.e. to exchange real-world value for acquiring and performing services. I see no world where these machines are applying for accounts with JPM or Visa. Instead, they'll need a payment system that doesn't care whether they're a human or a machine, that can integrate with existing payment systems, and that allows for global micropayments to pay for API calls to other machines. I'm Jod from Replit. Paying for AI services, Satoshis per token, is likely the best and most obvious Lightning use case. That's huge. Bitcoin and Lightning is the perfect monetary and payment systems for machines for several reasons. First, Bitcoin Lightning has no concept of accounts or human identity. Every wallet is just a public-private key pair. Secondly, Bitcoin Lightning can easily interoperate with the existing legacy financial system via services like Lightspark, River, Strike, etc. Third, Bitcoin Lightning can facilitate real-time, global, and programmable micropayments, making it easy to pay for things like conditional API calls, e.g. imagine streaming 10 Satoshis every second until the AI has paid for a terabyte of storage. This vision of programmable payments for API calls is currently being developed by Lightning Labs as the L402 protocol. The L402 working group has calls once a month to flesh out the protocol. If anyone's interested in learning more, getting involved with that, let me know. When I first wrote the above paragraph in mid-May, I thought it would be at least a few months before we saw this vision come to fruition. But at the above mentioned Replit AI hackathon, Cody and Laulu also showcased a live demo of LangChain agents making Lightning payments for gated API calls to purchase virtual resources. As a next step, I'd love to see someone integrate L402 payments and Lightning wallets with the LangChain agents in GP Team, a multi-agent simulation based on the recent Stanford generative agents paper. And then to kind of toot our own horn a little bit, we've got some, that's kind of like what we're working on here. And we've got one of our pull requests here as an example of building up an AI agent that can take different actions in exchange for, hang on a second. Kind of quoting from the memory, this memory architecture that can power agents from the generative agents paper, and then kind of applying it to auto development and stuff. Okay, so I want to go into a little bit more about the Open Agents project in particular and what we're doing. But I want to pause here and just let anyone else have a reaction, question, comment to anything you've heard. Take the mic and say something so I can take some water here.
Stacks, I know you have something to say.
Come on, Stacks, get up there.
Come on. You're the Noster devs.
All right, since Carr put me up to it, I do want to ask if you have any opinions on the AT protocol.
I do. I haven't had a lot of like firsthand experience with it. I kind of, what comes to mind is like the story that Fiatjov told about his bad experience, like getting invited to their Discord group and everyone just talking about different things and like kind of just coming at it from a different angle. And I think part of his critique was like they were all talking about like how things can be censored. This is kind of in the aftermath when everyone was talking about like Twitter censorship and having to deplatform, and it was just like their focus was like kind of like different. So the AT protocol is the protocol underlying this project called Blue Sky, which was a project initiated originally at Twitter under Jack Dorsey with the idea of building this sort of like independent social media protocol that Twitter would eventually become a client of. I think it's telling that after leaving Twitter, Dorsey then threw his apparently full weight behind Nostr. What would you like to say about the AT protocol?
Well, I'm kind of at a similar level. I haven't dug too deep into it technically, but I've kind of glanced at some of the documentation, and a lot of it seems promising. Some of the things they do actually do remind me of Nostr, but I like how it seems to offer much better guarantees of data integrity. Well, Nostr has no guarantees of data integrity, and it can be useful for certain kinds of apps, but I think on the social side, it causes a lot of unexpected behavior for the users. And then if you're not like kind of techie, it could be pretty off-putting for a lot of people, especially when they lose their contact list.
Have you seen any interaction or discussion around intersections between AT and AI, or are they like completely focused on the social use case?
I see most focus on the social, and I think there's maybe opportunity for people who are into Bitcoin, Lightning, and AI to maybe consider that as a social protocol and try to build similar things there. And that's kind of where I'm at. I haven't gone as deep as I should into it, but I kind of want to see if it's possible to build some of the ideas that I've explored on Nostr, but what would it take to build stuff like that on the AT protocol?
I'm curious also, are you familiar enough to comment on like differences between the different Nostr NIPs dealing with AI stuff, like NIP 90, NIP, I think 105? Is Jim here? Like, any thoughts on kind of like the intersection between Nostr and AI?
My understanding of those NIPs is very surface level, but it's an exciting area. I like seeing the development there. I do like it seems like there's more simplicity in the approach that Jim's been taking, where you're just essentially creating a marketplace for HTTP requests. So, but beyond that, I haven't really looked into the specs too much. One more question. So, how close are we to a world where anyone with a GPU could be just selling that as a resource, almost like crypto mining, when people could realistically do that on their home computers?
I think very close. The sort of stampede of people that we had when we first announced GPU Utopia was largely from former crypto miners who had a bunch of like spare GPUs lying around, and we're like, wait a second, I can monetize these? And the idea is like, yes, like assuming that there's like a demand, and in the beginning we're like, okay, if we can't rely on the large providers to have reliable GPU supply, then maybe we just have to do this. Now it'd be a big driver of demand. And what we saw was that we actually got to a level of kind of oversupply. We had too many people trying to provide GPUs that were not competitive enough on things like speed of inference. If you're trying to build a chat application, you need that thing to be like really fast. So part of our kind of shift away from emphasizing the open compute network to this like broader idea of agents was because I think that agents are going to be that kind of like large use case that drives a lot of the demand for hopefully that compute. And the cool thing about this is agents, being that they are long-running processes, will not have the same expectations of extremely low latency, like if you were building up a chat app. If you are trying to, for example, the main like large use case that I've been focused on is this idea called auto dev, or like a developer that can live in your GitHub repo, master the complete context of your repo, and like be able to respond to issues and also make pull requests with code commands. And we're getting pretty close to that. There's a PR in here from Fairy AI. I just closed it yesterday because it's a little bit stale now. But if your expectation is, look, I just need, I just need this agent to like respond to my pull request. And if your usual expectation is that happens within like, a day working with a junior developer, if it takes like 10 minutes because it's hitting, these relatively slower endpoints, but as long as that's sort of like, I don't know, uncensored and more customizable, more deterministic than relying on the OpenAI, I think that might be sufficient demand. So I think that the technical challenges of having compute being able to be provided in a decentralized way have been solved. There's been a number of other projects like Folding at Home, and a bunch of other sort of like non-AI projects that have shown how to do that reliably over a period of years, where people can contribute their compute to some kind of shared purpose. The idea of paying people micropayments in exchange for the compute is something that we specifically built. It's basically a glorified proof of concept. I mean, it works. But the question is just like, where is the level of demand for the type of like super low level compute that a lot of people will want to bring? But if you're someone who has, maybe you have a 3090 rig, or you have a any other type of like more powerful computer, to leave that on overnight and earn some sats overnight, assuming you can get paid more than the electricity costs, that's something that also possible now, but we're trying to kind of like line up the demand for that. The other interesting element is what happens when the larger sort of institutional Bitcoin miners get involved. I've talked now with 2 different sort of small to mid-sized Bitcoin miners who are looking to diversify away from exclusively Bitcoin mining because they think the economics might not let them, I don't know, survive the next year or so, but like, hey, how can we leverage our existing data center to maybe push some AI specific infrastructure in there? And once they are able to, if the model to this point has been, hey, let's get some GPUs and then we can sign them up on contracts where people are paying for the compute, the sort of argument, or you might think that they would be able to charge more if instead of just charging for the compute, they could charge for the compute with the sort of bundled AI services, because all they have to do is, let's just say hypothetically, run our GPUtopia worker on your machines. Now you're getting paid for the compute, but the bundled AI services for which people are going to be willing to pay, theoretically, way more than just the base level compute. It's a huge thing where it's too big of an idea for us to like fully lean into, but I think soon is the answer. But we need more help, so more ideas for other people.
Thank you.
Cool. Questions, comments, anything else? I'm gonna give like hey, let's retweet this. I'm gonna give like maybe a 5-minute spiel on open agents, and then we will wrap up and do one last Q&A. So yeah, check this out. This whole article is worth reading and digesting in its entirety. hivemind.vc/AI. If you need like startup ideas, you just read this, and there's kind of a wealth of ideas. So for open agents, the idea is to build a sort of a Hugging Face for agents. Hugging Face, if you don't know, is like, there you go, like the AI community, I think for machine learning experts. But it's just where there's like a ton of open models, all the like latest like, open model, like the Mixtral and different fine-tuned models, they got all uploaded here. A lot of projects are really good about also releasing their data sets. And you can just kind of like go in here and comment on these things. And part of our argument is like, there should be this type of community interaction, but specifically for agents. And so just to give an example of like agentic workflows that we want to see. Let me pop over to our open agents thing. So I guess it might be helpful to like define agent, because people mean different things by that. I define it as just like a long-running software process that can do something on behalf of you. There's a bunch of companies out there now that are building AI agents. They call them agents, but they're really just called browser agents. Like it like kind of like automates your browser, and you can like tell it something like book me a ticket from here to there, and it'll like click on pages in Expedia for you. And there's companies that are like just productizing that, and like here's our agent that does orders tickets for you, or does some sort of like automated workflows. It's just kind of like automation on steroids. It's kind of like the most basic way of thinking about it. Then there's people that are kind of coming at it from the angle of like these assistants or home assistants, where you can kind of imagine like Alexa on steroids, where you can request more specific things. Go and research this and like compile a report and do this. And at the base level, what you're actually doing, or what that agent actually consists of, are just some basic building blocks. You're calling a large language model to like process like the user intent and like come up with maybe some like next steps of actions. That translates into if it needs to take action in the world, it's pretty much always through just some third-party API call. Like, hey, call the Expedia API to like book this ticket. If it needs to consult a knowledge base, it's probably just running this very basic, it's called retrieval augmented generation. It's using this cosine similarity search. Basically, it's looking up in a vector database the kind of thing that powers like machine learning, like recommendation engines, to find information in its knowledge base that's similar to what you're asking for, and then it'll kind of use the large language model to help, basically giving an agent a brain, kind of. And then from the input-output standpoint, like if you're talking to it, it's just going to like transcribe what you say, turn it into a way that it can be passed to an LLM, translate that into API endpoints. That's basically it. The building blocks of these agents are very simple. But if you look around, the internet, the people that are talking about agents, there's a lot of people hyping, my agent can do this, and my agent can, I can give it a task, and then it'll like split it up, and it'll kind of like build this website. You got a lot of people like making demos and kind of like hyping up a bunch of stuff. But there's just not much of anyone building or deploying or relying on these things in production, because they're just not reliable. And so one of the great AI kind of local AI hacker, Anton, are LLMs agents just a gimmick? Is anyone using them at scale? I can see next models being accurate to a point where it works if it's well grounded and boundaries are clearly defined. But one can also write a script to do this. I've done this for dozens of websites, and it doesn't take long to do with accuracy that an LLM can't match. I don't know if an agent that can book me a flight is that useful. Law. I went to NeurIPS, this big like AI ML conference. A bunch of like AI entrepreneurs, people went there, and there was this one event where there's some AI VC we're sitting in like a circle with like 20 different like AI founders and smart people, and the question that the host asked was, can anyone give me an example of an AI agent that's live in production today? And I'll ask you guys this question too, because no one in the crowd could answer. You think about these like demos that you saw, and like those experiments that you did, but like, where's the agent that people are relying on? Then he followed up and he said, does anyone have a prediction? And one guy close to me said, I think in 6 months, we'll have a agent that can sort of live in a GitHub repo and comment on issues, make pull requests, comments, commits, and just like do code as sort of like at the level of like a junior developer. And I said, I predict that too, except I'm going to say 2 months instead of 6, because that's what we are building. So just as an example, here's an example of like me saying an issue, and then I like run this script of like the little quote unquote agent, that all that's really doing right now is taking what I say, maybe combining it with some other context, and then generating a response. And then we have this conversation. And the cool thing about like this in particular, and then that it gets to the point where it's breaking down steps, and when I've done this and I've had sort of these back and forths with this very basic agent, some of the best responses I've ever gotten, and this is like GPT-4 is the model that we're using to actually generate these responses, like the early GPT-4, I guess, before it got kind of neutered. I've got some of the most like brilliant responses just from this agent. And I'm like, okay, if I could then just extend this a bit so that it could like know with greater context what's in my code base if I use, I don't know, tabs, not spaces, or I format things a particular way, or instead of like needing to copy paste things into ChatGPT, like all of the information that it would need to like know what's the type of code that I would like is all in here. You can just kind of like read it and kind of infer my intent, or look at the commit messages. Like there's a wealth of context in here, and can we just have the agent be able to read that? And so one of the things that we've gone through and done is like kind of gone through some of those papers, like the one Max had mentioned, the generative agents papers. There's a number of like papers that detail the sort of like building blocks of agents. We've gone through and kind of identified, here's the different modules that we want to build. If you're interested in AI agents, I recommend following Jim Fan on Twitter. He's a AI researcher at NVIDIA, and they just published a paper called Voyager. So just to give an example of like the latest the more academic approach of agents. So this was like this one, I think one of the best papers, or the previous version, the previous year submission, building up these Minecraft agents, won like best paper at NeurIPS. And the big kind of important part about this Voyager was that they figured out how to kind of take AI agents out of the realm of just like running these ML algorithms on them, and how just through basically prompt engineering, how to have them be able to be these long-lived agents that can learn over time. So let me just read this briefly. I'm excited to announce Voyager, the first lifelong learning agent that plays Minecraft purely in context. Voyager continually improves itself by writing, refining, committing, and retrieving code from a skill library. GPT-4 unlocks a new paradigm. Training is code execution rather than gradient descent. Gradient descent is kind of what powers the sort of like training of models. So trained model is then a code base of skills that Voyager iteratively composes rather than matrices of floats. We are pushing no gradient architecture to its limit. So it just like beats all the other Minecraft agents. Everything's open source. They're creating these sort of generalist agents. And so one thing I was able to do is like read the paper, because they describe sort of the architecture and the memory and all these things that are needed to equip this generalist agent that can learn and take actions and learn in the context of an environment. And I was like, wait a second. These concepts directly apply if you were to just replace the environment of Minecraft with GitHub. And so that's some of the like thinking I've been doing, and kind of these videos I've been going through is like, hey, wait a second, let's build up, take the concepts directly from that paper and kind of build up these modules. So just to wrap things up, we are increasingly going to be not building all of this code ourselves, because we can't. Through that XTism plugin framework I mentioned earlier, we figured out how to have agents be composed of different building blocks that can be written by other developers and in any of like 10 different programming languages. And there can be an agent module. So for example, I'll just give the examples of the agents that or the plugins that we're going to be building out on this video stream over the next week or so. Let me just grab this video here. So there should be plugins to, for example, check the Bitcoin price, run a text inference to your choice of backend, OpenAI, GPUtopia, local LM, whatever. Create a vector embedding. Get a GitHub repo folder structure. Comment on a GitHub issue. Call an external API. Send or receive a Bitcoin payment. Each of these like small pieces of functionality can be encapsulated in a little plugin, so that you can envision that you as a developer, or even a non-developer, you should be able to build up your own agent doing nothing but dragging and dropping little cards. So here's an example of call it a task or a step, but soon this is going to be just like a external module. So for validating input, running an embedding, generating a text inference, returning, calling an LLM. Those are the 4 that we built code for already. The next big one is going to be call third-party API, and then payments. So if you stay tuned over the next week or so, we're going to be announcing a new round of Bitcoin bounties. It'll probably be a full Bitcoin worth that'll be split up between people who develop these plugins. So it's going to have two kind of things. We kind of want to just have some bounties, maybe a few $100s, maybe a few $1,000s worth of Bitcoin for the first sort of round of developers building the first 10 or so plugins that meet certain criteria. In addition to that, the plugins will be able to kind of fit within this flow of funds document. This is just kind of written to give an overview of how we are approaching Bitcoin and Lightning payments, kind of to reflect that thesis I was getting at earlier about the machine-to-machine payments. Our objective kind of as a company is we want to get Bitcoin paid out to as many people as possible, as much as possible, as fast as possible, with the easiest user experience. And that Bitcoin is going to be a sort of fractional rev share from people paying in Bitcoin or fiat or whatever for usage of these agents. If you're someone who hires developers and you can spin up a junior dev who can do the work equivalent of a junior dev, instead of you paying $6,000 a month, you pay $60 a month. That's something that people are going to want to pay for. I could probably, and there's at least one company that I know of that's building this kind of thing, kind of closed source. They just want to build a product around it and do the standard kind of usual VC backed, we're closed source and gonna, I don't know, flip this to someone at some point. But my argument is to fit into that kind of overall thesis from HiveMind, as well as from our, the four trends that we thought earlier. Is like, this should be an open ecosystem of agents. Ideally, these plugins are going to be registered in something like Nostr. I imagine we may even do our own Nostr NIP for this, for registering these plugins so that they can be solving things basically at the level of the protocol instead of just as one company. But the idea here is that the users could maintain a balance and top up with Bitcoin, Lightning, or credit card. Contributors earn sats that get added to the balance. Contributors can withdraw their balance via Bitcoin or Lightning until we get the full L402 integration in, which we're working on. But that'll be kind of like the full non-custodial thing. But here's an example. Alice adds resolve GitHub pull request to the agent skills database, or writes a module for resolving a GitHub pull request. The skill uses a specific chain of calls to APIs, LLMs, and vector databases. Note, Alice does not need to be a developer because you saw the little cards you can drag and drop for each of those things. Bob configures his auto dev agent to use that skill. He pays 12,000 sats. I just pulled these numbers out of my butt. USD $5 to run the agent job. Alice earns 2,000 sats because she assembled the skill. Carol earns 1,000 sats for providing compute for the vector embeddings and open model calls via her GPUtopia worker bee client. Dave earns 500 sats because his API key was used for the one call to GPT-4. Eve earns 120 sats because she referred Alice to sign up months ago. Frank earns 120 sats because he referred Bob to sign up yesterday. Grace earns 300 sats because her fine-tuned model was used in the skill flow. Heidi earns 300 sats because her custom data set was used in the skill flow. OpenAgent keeps the rest because we're a business and want to grow our Bitcoin stack too. So the percentages here are just super rough, but you can imagine all of this being a truly open market with floating rates that vary based on supply and demand, where anybody knows that they can come in and pay or contribute to agents all in Bitcoin anywhere in the world. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up. Questions, comments, insults, flames, rants, hot takes? Yes. Give it to me, Austin.
Am I supposed to talk on the mic?
Yeah.
Okay. I wonder, do you know of any tasks that you actually trust any kind of agent to do fully without supervision? Because this is like a paradox that I run into with agents. Is like, okay, they can do a lot of cool things, but no matter what, I wouldn't trust them fully. I would always want to interject before they make any kind of decision, especially if there's like money on the line or resources that are being used. And then it's like, if I'm interjecting, then this is basically just a shortcut for me, like prompting ChatGPT with my own question in the first place, right? Like with the concept of like reviewing code, or like, yeah, I could have an AI agent in my repo that's like looking over things and giving me suggestions, but I'm already going to ask for suggestions. So it just feels kind of like something that's a shortcut and not something that like I can actually fully automate anything. So
I hear you, absolutely. The question of like trust and low quality inputs or non-deterministic outputs, because you get different things of different quality at different times, is I think it's a solvable problem. And my bet is that, at least for like the kinds of things that I'm modeling out currently, I'm gonna guess that there is a level of verification, validation, quality control that you could express and automate and put into a given agent flow. So I'll give an example. I asked Ferry, to the initial GitHub agent, to auto dev agent, to read an issue, consult the relevant code, and make a pull request summarizing the changes. And she did. And I have my test runner ran the test, said these tests failed. And I had a comment, and she wrote code that was better, but then like broke something else. But like, imagine that I get this fixed where the test pass. If there's something where I write a unit test, and it's as simple as like adding support for a new model, but super simple. If a unit test passes, and I can just have it so that there's output that I can go inspect, I would happily have the bulk of the legwork of actually running the code, generating the code, be done by the agent. Now, in this case, I don't expect the agent to do everything perfectly in the same way that I wouldn't expect a junior dev to do everything perfectly. She's going to submit a PR, and I'm going to review it. But I would rather spend my time reviewing PRs from 10 agents than having to do all that code myself, because I wouldn't be able to do that on the same time frame. Can you think of an example of some other use case where you, like, what do you have in mind that you just wouldn't want to trust an agent necessarily?
I mean, anything that I think is like really interesting to automate, like stuff with code, that's a lot of what I'm doing as a developer, but moving money, consolidating UTXOs, like, stuff with Bitcoin, the natural stuff your mind kind of goes when you think of how to combine AI and Bitcoin. And then you're kind of like, well, at the end of the day, I always want to be able to interject because I honestly don't trust it. And there's too many edge cases and unknowns. And so if I'm going to have to interject, then that's a very different thing. Then that's kind of like, there's already kind of products like that, like Autopilot for Lightning, for like automating your fees. I don't know if they're even using AI, but it's like, I can use a service like that. And at the end of the day, it's kind of a lot of work to create this workflow that's really just kind of a shortcut, which is cool. Cool to have a shortcut like, okay, here, this is like 3 iterations of me prompting ChatGPT is like already waiting for me in my repo. It's like, okay, that's pretty cool. But I feel like Copilot is going to be there pretty soon as well. And I'll just like move over my $10 subscription, and I didn't need to like build the kind of environment for the model to live and let it like iterate and get good. So I don't know. I guess I'm just like skeptical of the use cases, and I'm not a like AI ML engineer, so I'm only ever going to be an integrator. And I'm like waiting for those models to get good enough in some narrow domain to where I could truly like let them rip and not have to interject, except for like, rare cases, I guess.
I hear you. And I think I also like coming at it from the like integrator standpoint. I'm someone who's like, I've seen since day one, and just like the immediate productivity increase that I've had from like talking to ChatGPT is like, this has already leveled me up just talking to this thing. If I can start by solving things like copy pasting things into the project, into the prompt, like that would speed me up. But I've had all sorts of things where I've been like, wow, like this thing would be possible if there was just more reliability, or like you said, like there's a whole bunch of stuff that you could probably do in terms of like customized workflows for yourself. But then it's like the time that it would take you to like set up to get all of that dialed in and working reliably, which is uncertain anyway, is like time that you might as well just have like done the thing. But that assumes that you're building all your own tools. Now, there are companies or people that are trying to position themselves like, we're going to solve problem X for you. And my argument is for probably not all use cases. Like I like consolidating UTXOs or doing like irreversible things on the Bitcoin chain is like the last thing that I would want my agent doing anything. But like lower pressure stuff, like you can make a commit if it's a mistake. I'm not going to merge it. I can absolutely imagine that if there were a few people that like full-time focused on making the best damn pull request resolver coder for Laravel operating within a GitHub repo, that if the equivalent of like 10 people focused on this full-time for a month, that's something that I would want to pay to use. But we don't really have, at least I haven't seen, some like collaborative framework that can enable people to like truly work together on that. I think a lot of that is just going to be facilitated by establishing an actual market for these agents and having things be actually composable, which is why I've been so excited about like we now have these building blocks of composability, Bitcoin for money, Lightning for payments, Nostr for data, and I think XDism for this kind of like business logic compute. And like the four of those, all we need is just like the actual, I don't know, kind of community framework collaboration to have people come together and build together and experiment with this. So that's what we're trying to build at Open Agents. Anything else?
Yeah, no, that's cool.
I'll wrap there. Thank you all for your time. Thanks for coming out. I'll be around. Follow me on Twitter. Ping me any questions anytime. I'm happy to help with you with anything else.